Spain. A beautiful country in southwestern Europe. With an area a little over 500,000 square kilometers, it's about twice the size of the state of Oregon. Its population is about 47 million, and its largest city, Madrid, with a population of 3.3 million, is the third largest in the European Union, behind London and Berlin. Spain is one of the best tourist spots in all of Europe. Its gorgeous beaches, beautiful architecture make it a destination for tourists around the world. It's known for its foods like paella, tapas. Spain is also known for its beautiful architecture, including the Bilbao Museum in Barcelona and the Moorish Palace Alhambra in Granada. I had the privilege of living in Guadalajara, Spain, which is a city in the province of Guadalajara to the northeast of Madrid. I was there for about 9 months. While many structures in Guadalajara date back to the 8th century, most of the city is relatively new and has been constructed within the last 60 years. In 2003, the high-speed train AVE added a stop in Guadalajara, and since then the city has seen an explosion of growth. I lived in Guadalajara in the pre-AVE days around the year 2000, on the 7th floor of an apartment building. 6 months after arriving, I awoke on the 27th of May to see a small house directly across the street being demolished. I quickly took out my camera, this is pre-digital photography days, and shot progress photos for the next 3 months. Demolition began around 8 o'clock on May 27th, and all of these pictures were taken from my 7th-story bedroom window. The existing house was a simple 2-story structure, very characteristic of structures built in and around the time of the 1940s. Has characteristic Spanish tile roofs, retail on the bottom floor, and a living unit on the 2nd floor. Also very typical of Spanish construction are the persianas, or the Persian blinds that are built into the window system. They're solid shutters that are rolled down with a strap on the inside of the house, completely blocking out all light and ventilation. These come in very handy during the hot summer months in Spain. Demolition proceeded very quickly on that first day. Within a matter of hours, the entire structure had been removed. I found it interesting as demolition progressed that I was able to get a close-up view of how this building was constructed. You can see from these photographs that the perimeter walls were made of solid brick construction, about 2 courses thick. Also, the floor structures were made of concrete. I found it interesting that the roof was supported on a framework of brick. You can see that the bricks were spaced apart to reduce weight. And on top of the brick, wood timbers were then placed down and the concrete tiles over those. Soon the site was scraped clean, and I could tell very quickly as excavation began on the foundation system that this new building would be much larger than the original one. You can see here that the excavations for the foundations go right up to the sidewalk and the 2 adjacent buildings, indicating that the new building would take up the entire footprint of the site. I was surprised as construction proceeded that the methods used are very similar to the ones used in the United States. Something new to me was the installation of the construction crane. You can see these large concrete plinths that were placed down and a crane on a flatbed truck. It only took a matter of hours for the crane to be erected. This crane would remain here in the street blocking traffic for the next 11 months of construction. But its role was vital in hauling the materials and supplies up to the upper floors as construction progressed. Excavations were made for the perimeter footings and then filled with rebar. Soon the concrete trucks arrived and poured concrete. I found it interesting that the corner foundations were poured separately from the intermediate grade beams. After the concrete had cured for a day or so, excavation began on the interior grade beams, and then those were filled with rebar and more concrete was placed. All the while, the columns for the first floor were also formed in place, with steel rebar and metal cages that were bolted together. With every pour, they conducted a slump test and poured concrete cylinders for strength testing. They always did the test near the crane, so I had a very good view. On one occasion, the slump test didn't pass, and the cement truck was sent away, and a couple hours later, a new truck arrived. Note that the first floor walls are already being laid. It's hard to see in this photo, but the bricks are hollow. The mason never used a saw, but simply used his trowel to chop the bricks to size. After the concrete had cured for about a week, the formwork was removed from the first floor columns, and forms were then set up for the second floor. Metal jacks were set up between the columns to support the new second floor. These would support the weight of the upper floors for the coming weeks and months. With the wood forms in place, concrete joists were then laid down, and hollow brick units were laid in between them. It took a little over a day for the entire floor to be laid out. The joists and the bricks were simply laid in place. They were not anchored in any way. No adhesives or fasteners. The concrete that would later be poured on top of them would fuse them all together into one structural unit. I found it very interesting how quickly this whole process went, and it was very quiet. There wasn't the usual hammering and banging that you associate with construction in the United States. The crane simply lifted up materials and offloaded them, and the workers would distribute them around the floor system. It was very quiet, swift, and efficient. There was almost no waste. The only time anything was thrown away was near the perimeter of the elevator shaft when they would cut the brick units to fill in a couple gaps here and there. Following adding the perimeter formwork, rebar and welded wire mesh were laid over the first floor, and then concrete from the trucks was brought in. All of the beams and the columns were vibrated, and the floor was level. The finished floor was actually left fairly rough, which I'm guessing was by design since the floor would eventually be covered with tile. In this view, we have a better shot of the floor beam, rebar, and formwork. No formwork is set up against the two adjacent buildings. Simply a 1-inch piece of foam was set against them, and the concrete was poured up against that. A perimeter form was set up around the elevator shaft and the building perimeter. This process of pouring floors and building columns proceeded for the next couple of floors. 1 month after finishing the foundation, the formwork was nearly finished for the 4th floor. All of the steel jacks are still in place for the entire building. The 4th floor featured a large cantilever on the corner and had more rebar than the other floors. Within 5 days, this 4th floor had cured and the final columns were poured, and their formwork was removed. I was very surprised to see that the roof was formed in the exact same way as the lower floors. I almost anticipated a different structural system being used, as we would typically do in the United States. The columns are poured at varying heights, wood formwork was put in place, and the same concrete joists and hollow brick units were placed. Then concrete covered it all. With all of the structural work complete, the crews began to clean up the site. The jacks were removed, and the structural columns and beams that were built bore the weight of the building for the first time. Unfortunately, at this point, I moved away from Guadalajara, and I wasn't able to take photographs of the final processes. But I did take photographs of buildings under construction in other parts of Spain. And my guess is that this building was finished in the same manner as these other ones. Structural concrete columns and floors are built, and then the interior and perimeter walls are made of brick units. These brick units are hollow, and they allow for electrical conduit, plumbing, low voltage wiring. Anything that might be going into the building can run through those units. Then they get a smooth plaster finish on the interior. The exteriors might be clad in additional brick, or the brick units themselves might be left intact. Window units are set in place. The Persiana blinds are installed. Even stairs are made out of the same method. Concrete ramps being built, and then the individual treads being made of chopped up hollow brick units. These are then tiled and finished to where they look like a monolithic stair. 8 months later, I was able to return back to the building and see it in its final form. The building today has a typical Spanish restaurant on the bottom floor, serving salads, pork, fish, pizza. It's called Catapan Salados. The upper floors are occupied by residents who live and work in the areas around about. You can see in this final photograph that there is a brick wall at the ground level. When I took this picture, this bottom unit was not occupied yet. It hadn't been rented out. Today, however, that wall was replaced with a wall with a window. This gives future tenants of this space flexibility. This wall is non-load bearing. They could put storefront in there, windows, whatever they want to do to facilitate their business. In this case, the current restaurant uses it as mainly a solid wall, with tables set behind it in their kitchen area. Overall, I felt very pleased that I was able to watch and document this process over this long period of time. As a tourist, you don't usually get to see these long processes play out over time. It's something that only a resident of a country gets to experience. With the prices of bricks skyrocketing in Spain, the recession of the economy, construction has gotten a lot more expensive and slowed down. But this technique is used all throughout Europe and has been used in Spain for hundreds of years, so I don't see it going away anytime soon. It's very different from what we do in the United States, where the majority of buildings are made with wood that is hammered and nailed and fastened together in mechanical ways. Structure actually relied upon chemical bonds between the concrete and the brick units and the resulting friction that is generated between the rebar and the concrete. No fasteners or nails were ever placed in the building. In fact, the only fasteners that were ever used were with the wood formwork that was later removed and the bolts of the column forms that were removed. Overall, it's a very simple and elegant way to construct a building.